On a sweltering summer evening in 1837, in the misty depths of Harrow Parish, Louisiana, a crowd gathered under the dim glow of lanterns. The air hung heavy with the scent of sugarcane and fear. At the center of it all stood Elias, a young enslaved man, bound and defiant, facing a fate worse than death. The plantation owner, Victor Hargrove, signaled his overseers. With a creak of iron, the gates to the boar pen swung wide. Out charged a herd of massive, feral boars imported from distant lands. Their tusks sharp as blades, eyes wild with rage. These beasts were bred for one thing: to rip apart anyone who dared escape the swamps. The crowd held its breath, expecting blood and screams. But in that heart-pounding moment, the boars skidded to a halt. They didn't attack Elias. Instead, they circled him, snouts low, bristles raised, turning their snarls toward the onlookers. The animals that were meant to be weapons of terror had become his shield. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air as the mighty Hargrove Empire began to crack. What happened that night wasn't some freak accident or dark magic. It was a calculated unraveling, hidden in forgotten records, that exposed the rotten core of a system built on control and cruelty. This is the story of the Harrow Betrayal, a tale pulled from sealed parish ledgers and the secret journal of a long-forgotten naturalist. It's a mystery that questions everything we know about power, loyalty, and the bonds that form in the shadows. Before we dive into the sealed files of that fateful day, make sure to subscribe and hit notifications. History hides its darkest secrets, and we're about to shine a light on one that still echoes through time. The document at the heart of this investigation was never meant to see the light of day. It surfaced in 1987, tucked away in a dusty archive box at the Harrow Parish Courthouse, labeled as nothing more than old tax records damaged by a long-ago flood. But inside was a bundle of papers, brittle and yellowed, stamped with the faded seal of Elias Thorne, a naturalist and part-time surveyor for the district back in the 1830s. His report, titled An Account of Unnatural Occurrences at Hargrove Plantation, reads like the work of a man grappling with something beyond his understanding. Thorne wrote with a steady hand at first, but as the pages go on, the ink smears. The words crowd together, showing a mind pushed to its limits by what he saw. The dates are clear, the names etched in black, grounding this in cold, hard fact rather than legend. This isn't folklore. It's a forensic puzzle, pieced together from ledgers that reveal a hidden world of neglect and unexpected alliances. The setting Thorne describes is Hargrove Plantation, a vast stretch of sugarcane fields carved out of the Louisiana Bayou, about 15 miles from the nearest town. In 1837, the place was owned by Victor Hargrove, a sugar baron whose fortune came from backbreaking labor and an iron fist. But the real power behind the throne was his sister, Lydia Hargrove, who ran the day-to-day operations with a cold efficiency that made her infamous among the local elite. Records show the plantation was hitting hard times, with debts piling up from failed crops and expensive imports. The big house stood tall with its white pillars, but behind the facade, things were falling apart. Renovations ate into the budget, while the workers were driven harder than ever. It was a pressure cooker, sealed off by the surrounding swamps, where the fog rolled in thick and the air buzzed with mosquitoes and unspoken resentment. Thorne's notes paint a picture of the months leading up to the incident as a time of building strain. A drought had turned the fields into cracked earth, making everyone irritable and on edge. The animals were skittish, the workers moved like ghosts, saving every bit of strength just to get through the day. Lydia Hargrove comes across in the testimonies as a woman clinging to control, her authority brittle like old glass. She wasn't outright monstrous, at least not in the way stories sometimes paint these figures. But her fear of losing grip showed in sudden, sharp decisions, acts of punishment meant to remind everyone who was in charge. She ruled through displays of force, making sure the hierarchy stayed intact. At the core of the plantation's security was the boar pen, a sturdy enclosure built from thick timber set back from the main house by a quarter mile. Inside lived a herd of 12 feral boars, brought over from Europe at a huge cost. These weren't farm pigs. They were massive, aggressive creatures trained to roam the swamps at night. Their tusks a deadly barrier against anyone trying to flee. Their grunts and squeals echoed like warnings, a sound that kept the enslaved in line. The Hargroves had built their reputation on these beasts, spreading tales of their ferocity, showing off scars from demonstrations on stray animals or captured runaways. But digging into the records, Thorne uncovered a flaw in this setup, noted quietly in the margins of the plantation's books. The professional handler for the Boars, a man named Samuel Reed, had been let go 3 years earlier, in 1834. Lydia cut him loose to save money, redirecting funds to shore up the family's social standing with fancy dinners and imported goods. Without Reed, the care of these dangerous animals fell to whoever was available, often the lowest on the totem pole, those seen as disposable. This choice, buried in the accounting pages, set the stage for everything that followed. It turned a tool of terror into something unpredictable. The central figure in this story emerges from the shadows as Elias, listed in the inventories simply as Lot 27, a 22-year-old man born on a neighboring property and sold to Hargrove at age 15. The overseer's logs describe him as strong but quiet, not one for trouble, with a build suited more for heavy lifting than the delicate work of the fields. So they assigned him to the grunt jobs, the ones that kept the place running but stayed out of sight. He hauled water, mended fences, and most importantly, tended to the boar pen, slopping buckets of feed and scraps into the troughs each day. There's no record of Elias ever raising his voice or plotting against the system. Just years of steady work, day in and day out. Thorne's report notes that Elias had no close family on the plantation. His parents lost to illness when he was young. This left him isolated, sleeping in a rough shed near the animal enclosures, rising before dawn to start his rounds. From the bits of testimony pieced together, he comes across as someone deeply alone, finding whatever comfort he could in the routine, even among the beasts he was forced to care for. This isn't a story that starts with a bang of rebellion. It's quieter, more insidious. The real conspiracy brewed in the daily grind, in the moments when Elias entered that pen, facing down creatures that could kill him with a single charge. The Hargroves thought ownership was absolute, sealed with money and papers. But Elias knew something they didn't. True loyalty isn't bought. It's earned through small acts, day after day. As we peel back the layers, it becomes clear that the horror of that night stemmed from the owner's blindness. They passed the pen daily, hearing the boars quiet down when Elias approached, and chalked it up to nothing. They missed the signs of a shift, a bond forming right under their noses, one that would turn their world upside down. The spark that ignited it all was small, almost trivial. On July 10, 1837, a valuable shipment of tools went missing from the storage shed, tools meant for the harvest. The overseer, Marcus Hale, pointed fingers quickly. He found a broken lock and claimed Elias was the last one seen nearby. But the logs show Elias was out repairing irrigation ditches miles away at the time. Facts didn't matter. Lydia needed someone to blame for the mounting losses, a way to rally the workers and reassert control. Elias, with no one to speak for him, became the target. She declared it an act of sabotage, demanding a punishment that would echo across the plantation. The Boars would be the instrument, a public mauling to scar him for life, a living reminder of what happened to those who stepped out of line. This wasn't justice. It was theater, designed to instill fear. Lydia's diary entries, uncovered later, show her in a frenzy, planning every detail. She ordered the Boars starved for 3 days to heighten their aggression, a cruel tactic to ensure they'd be driven by pure hunger. Hale hesitated. His deposition notes the Boars had been acting odd lately, less responsive on patrols, almost sluggish. He suggested a simpler whipping. Lydia shut him down, calling it weakness. This moment highlights the rot at the core, where pride overrode sense. Invitations went out to nearby planters, turning the event into a grim social affair. The field was cleared, seats arranged with drinks, like it was a picnic rather than a horror show. Elias, when told of his fate, stayed silent. Witnesses from the quarters described him as calm, not broken, but detached, like he knew something they didn't. That quiet unnerved everyone. As the starvation days ticked by, the pen grew eerily still. Normally, hungry boars would rage against the bars. Instead, reports mention a low, unified rumble, like they were waiting for something specific. The enslaved were herded to watch, standing in lines under the sun. On the morning of July 13th, the humidity was suffocating, the fog clinging to the ground. Elias was marched to the center of the clearing, hands tied, standing alone, his eyes fixed on the pen gates. Lydia believed she was unleashing her property, tools of her will. She didn't know she'd created a different reality in that pen over the years. Thorne's journal digs into the history of the Boars' care, pulling from the ledgers back to 1834. After Reed's dismissal, entries show Elias taking over the feeding, his name appearing next to ration notes. But the official feed dropped off, cut for costs. Yet the Boars stayed healthy. No weight loss, no illnesses. Thorne figured Elias was sharing his own food, scraps from his meals, risking his health to keep them fed. Veterinary visits stopped too. Before, Reed called in experts monthly. After, nothing but the Boars thrived. Thorne concluded Elias was doctoring them himself, pulling ticks, treating wounds with whatever he could find, like mud packs from the swamp or herbs from the edges of the fields. A later account from another worker described seeing Elias in the pen at dusk, not rushing, but moving slow, letting the boars approach, even touching their snouts gently. This wasn't chance. It was pack instinct. Elias became their provider, their healer. The Boars saw him not as prey, but as leader. Overseer complaints from 1835 note the Boars hesitating on hunts, trailing off unless Elias was nearby. They dismissed it as laziness, but it was loyalty shifting. A key detail Thorne found was the pen's gate, a heavy latch that stuck, needing a specific yank to open. Elias wrestled it daily, and the Boars learned that sound meant food, safety. It rewired them. To the Boars, Lydia was a stranger, smelling of privilege and distance. Elias was everything. As the gates opened that day, the herd charged. The lead boar, a huge brute called Titan, led the way. The crowd tensed for the kill. But at the last second, Titan stopped short, the others fanning out around Elias. They formed a wall. Grunting warnings at the approaching overseers. Panic spread. Lydia shrieked orders, but the Boars ignored her. Hale advanced with a prod, and a boar lunged, tusks bared. The guests fled, carriages kicking up dust. The illusion shattered. Elias stood untouched, his presence commanding what money couldn't. In the aftermath, Hale blamed poison or spells, anything but the truth. Thorne examined the Boars, found no toxins, just signs of care. The bond was real, born of neglect. The Hargroves destroyed the herd that night, gunshots ringing out. But the damage was done. Mysterious deaths followed. Overseers found mauled in the swamps. Was it accident or something more? And as the cover-up deepened, one question lingered, pulling us further into the dark. What secret did Elias hold that turned beasts into allies? And how far would the Hargroves go to bury it forever? In the chaos that followed that sweltering July morning, the Hargrove plantation descended into a nightmare no one could have predicted. The Boars stood their ground around Elias, their massive bodies forming a living barrier, tusks glinting in the sun. Lydia Hargrove's screams cut through the air like a knife, but the animals didn't budge. They snorted and pawed the earth, eyes locked on the advancing overseers. Marcus Hale froze mid-step, his whip dangling uselessly from his hand. The guests scattered, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks in their haste to flee. Carriages rattled away down the dusty path, leaving behind a cloud of confusion and terror. Elias remained still in the center, his bound hands hanging loose, his face showing no triumph, just a quiet resolve that made the scene even more unsettling. The standoff dragged on for what felt like hours, though Thorne's journal says it was closer to 30 minutes. No one dared approach. The Boars shifted their weight, grunting low warnings whenever someone moved too close. Finally, Elias took a slow step toward the pen. The herd moved with him, like shadows following their source. He led them back inside, the gates creaking shut behind them. Then he turned, held out his wrists to be retied, and let the overseers lead him away without a word. It was a simple act, but it humiliated Lydia more than any rebellion could. She had set the stage for dominance, only to watch her own weapons obey someone else. The plantation workers, forced to witness it all, exchanged glances in the silence. They knew something fundamental had broken. That night, the Hargroves called an emergency meeting in the big house. Victor, who had been away in New Orleans on business, rushed back upon hearing the news. His letters, later found in parish archives, show a man frantic to contain the damage. He wrote to his lawyer, describing the event as a freak mishap, perhaps rabies or poison. But deep down, he feared it was something worse, a sign that control was slipping. Lydia paced the room, her usual composure shattered. She demanded the Boars be destroyed immediately. No debate. Victor agreed. Under the cover of darkness, Hale and a few trusted men approached the pen with rifles. The shots rang out one by one, echoing across the fields. The Boars thrashed and squealed, their bodies crumpling against the timber. Elias, locked in a nearby shed, must have heard every sound. The cruelty of it weighed heavy. A man forced to listen as the only creatures that had ever protected him were slaughtered. But killing the Boars didn't end the nightmare. It marked the beginning of a deeper unraveling. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the quarters. The workers spoke in hushed tones about Elias, calling him the Boar Whisperer. They wondered if he had some gift, or if it was just the result of years of unseen kindness. The overseers grew paranoid. Hale started patrolling more, his eyes darting to every shadow. He blamed Elias for bewitching the animals, claiming it was African voodoo or some dark ritual. His reports to Victor, preserved in the estate's files, read like the ramblings of a man losing his grip. He wrote of hearing grunts in the night, even though the pen was empty. The fear was real, eating away at him. Thorne, the naturalist, was summoned the next morning to inspect the carcasses before they were burned. He arrived with his kit, a quiet man more at home with plants and animals than people. His journal entries from that day show a growing unease. He examined the Boars one by one, noting their conditions. No signs of disease, no foam at the mouth, no dilated eyes from poison. They were healthy, strong, their muscles taut from good care. But as he cut into their stomachs, he found something that chilled him. The contents weren't just the sparse rations from the plantation. There were bits of cornmeal, the kind given to the workers, mixed with scraps of cloth that matched the rough shirts Elias wore. Thorne pieced it together. Elias hadn't just fed them the official slop. He had shared his own meals, risking starvation to keep them alive during the lean times. This discovery opened a floodgate. Thorne dug deeper, requesting access to the old ledgers. What he found painted a picture of neglect that had festered for years. After Samuel Reed's dismissal in 1834, the Boars' care budget was slashed. Entries showed dwindling supplies, yet the animals never weakened. Thorne noted healed scars on their hides, fractures that had mended without professional help. Someone had been tending them, setting bones with splints made from swamp reeds, the same reeds that grew near the ditches Elias repaired. It was amateur work, but effective. Thorne interviewed a few stable hands under the guise of a routine check. One boy, barely a teen, admitted he avoided the pen, leaving the dangerous tasks to Elias. He described seeing Elias sit with the boars at twilight, not rushing through feeds, but letting them nuzzle his hands, removing burrs from their coats with gentle pulls. The bond wasn't magic. It was biology, pack behavior twisted by circumstance. The boars, isolated and fierce, had imprinted on Elias as their leader. He controlled the food, the care, the safety. The Hargroves were outsiders, their commands meaningless. Thorne wrote in his journal about the irony. The plantation bred these beasts to instill fear, then handed their leash to the very person they oppressed. It was a vulnerability baked into the system. If kindness could turn tools of terror, then every estate was at risk. This thought terrified Thorne. He was a man of science, but he saw the human cost. The suffering it implied for Elias, alone with monsters, forging connections out of necessity. As Thorne's investigation continued, the risks escalated. Victor Hargrove caught wind of the probing and confronted him. Letters between them show Victor pressuring Thorne to label it rabies, to close the file quickly. But Thorne resisted, at least in private. He sealed his full findings in a separate addendum, not for the official record. Meanwhile, Elias sat in isolation, chained in the shed. The psychological toll on him must have been immense. Days turned to weeks with no trial. Just waiting in the dark, the sounds of the plantation muffled outside. He ate scraps, slept on dirt, his mind replaying the boars' protection and their deaths. The tragedy deepened when rumors reached the neighboring plantations. Riders came, not to help, but to demand action. They feared the story spreading, inspiring others. If one man could turn beasts, what else might rise up? Then the deaths began. First was a minor overseer, found mauled in the swamp edge 2 weeks after the incident. His body was torn, tusks marks clear. But the boars were dead, burned to ash. Hale blamed wild animals, but doubt crept in. Thorne examined the body, noting the wounds matched the Hargrove boar's tusks exactly, down to the curve. It was impossible. Whispers grew. Was it a copycat, or something supernatural? The fear ratcheted up. Workers refused to venture out at night. Lydia withdrew to her rooms, her health failing. Her diary entries from this time show a woman haunted. She wrote of dreams where boars charged at her, Elias riding atop them like a ghost. The pressure built, her authority crumbling as staff deserted. Thorne pushed on, uncovering more. He found a hidden note in the ledgers, a complaint from Hale in 1836. The boars had grown selective, only responding well to Elias on patrols. They ignored others, sometimes turning aggressive toward unfamiliar faces. It was dismissed as poor training. But Thorne saw the pattern. The allegiance had solidified long before the spectacle. Elias wasn't just a feeder. He was their alpha, earned through sweat and sacrifice. The human suffering here hits hard. Elias, stripped of family, treated like less than human, found solace in animals meant to destroy him. It's a quiet tragedy, one that speaks to the depths of isolation. The mystery deepened with a second death. Another overseer, this one close to Hale, vanished during a night watch. His remains turned up days later, scattered in the bayou. Bones gnawed. Panic set in. Victor offered rewards for information, but no one talked. Thorne's journal hints at suspicion. He wondered if Elias had allies among the workers, perhaps staging the attacks to mimic boar wounds. Or was it real wild boars, drawn by the scent of blood? The risk to everyone grew. Plantations locked down, arming guards. Lydia, in her paranoia, accused Thorne of stirring trouble. She demanded he leave. But before he did, Thorne interviewed Elias in secret. The meeting, detailed in his notes, was brief. Elias spoke little, his voice steady despite the chains. He denied spells or poisons. It was simple, he said. He treated the boars with respect, gave them what they needed when no one else would. Thorne pressed for more, but Elias just looked away. That encounter shook Thorn. He saw the toll, the hollow eyes, the scars from years of labor. Elias wasn't a hero or a villain. He was a man surviving in hell. As summer faded, the tragedy mounted. A fire broke out in the storage shed, the same one where the tools went missing. It destroyed records, including some of Thorn's copies. Arson was suspected, but proof vanished in the flames. Victor blamed Elias, using it as excuse for harsher measures. Elias was beaten, left in the sun for days. The suffering was vivid, his body weakening, yet he didn't break. Workers smuggled him water, small acts of defiance that spread like cracks in a dam. New information emerged from an unlikely source. A former worker escaped to the north years later, gave testimony in an abolitionist paper in 1845. He described Elias training the Boars subtly, using whistles and gestures during feeds. Not to rebel, but to calm them, to build trust. It was survival, turning potential killers into companions. This account, cross-referenced with Thorn's, added layers. The fear wasn't just of Elias, but of what he represented. If one person could forge such bonds, the whole system was fragile. The psychological pressure on the Hargroves intensified. Victor drank heavily, his letters rambling about curses. Lydia fell ill, bedridden, her mind fracturing. She saw shadows in corners, heard snorts in the wind. The estate faltered, crops untended as fear paralyzed the workforce. Overseers quit, replaced by harsher men who only worsened the tension. Thorn's final entries before leaving show his own dread. He feared for Elias's life, suspecting the Hargroves would kill him quietly. But the mystery persisted. A third death, Hale himself, found in his cabin with throats slashed in a way that mimicked a tusk gore. No weapon nearby. Suicide or murder. Thorn noted inconsistencies, like mud tracks leading to the swamp. The risk had escalated to murder, the plantation turning on itself. In the midst of this, parish officials got involved. A formal inquest was called, files sealed but later unearthed. They interviewed survivors, pieced together timelines. Documents show conflicting stories. Some blamed ghosts, others sabotage. Thorn submitted his report, watered down for safety, but his private journal held the truth. The Boars' loyalty was no anomaly. It was the result of human neglect meeting human resilience. The suffering peaked with Elias's trial, a shem in the big house. Accused of witchcraft and theft, he stood silent as witnesses lied. The tragedy was in the details. His emaciated frame, the bruises. Lydia, from her sickbed, demanded death. But Victor hesitated, fearing more backlash. Instead, they planned to sell him south to harsher fields where he'd vanish. Yet before that happened, Elias disappeared. One night, his shed door found ajar, chains broken. Search parties scoured the swamps, but no trace. Whispers said the Boar spirits guided him, or workers helped. The fear exploded. Plantations armed up, patrols doubled. The Hargroves' empire crumbled, debts calling in as labor fled. Thorn's last note pondered the unknown. Had Elias planned it all, or was it fate? The mystery lingered, pulling everyone deeper into paranoia. And as bodies piled up, one chilling fact emerged. The deaths continued, even after Elias was gone. Whatever force he unleashed, it wasn't done yet. As the fog of autumn settled over Harrow Parish, the Hargrove plantation became a ghost of its former self. The fields lay fallow, choked with weeds that twisted like fingers from the earth. Workers who remained moved like shadows, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Victor Hargrove barricaded himself in the big house, his once commanding presence reduced to a trembling shell. He pored over ledgers by candlelight, muttering about debts and curses, his hands shaking as he wrote frantic letters to distant kin. Lydia, confined to her bed, wasted away under the weight of her own mind. Her skin grew pale and thin, like paper stretched too tight, and she whispered of boars in the walls, their grunts echoing in her fevered dreams. The doctors called it hysteria, but those who tended her knew better. It was guilt, gnawing from the inside, a slow poison born of the cruelty she had wielded like a crown. The deaths didn't stop with Elias's disappearance. They crept in quietly at first, then with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate. A field hand found in the bayou, his body marked with deep gashes that mirrored tusk wounds. Then a visitor from a neighboring estate vanished during a late-night ride, his horse returning alone with blood on its flanks. Parish records from the inquest, unsealed decades later, describe these incidents with clinical detachment, but the undertone of fear seeps through. Investigators noted the wounds were too precise, too familiar, yet no wild boars roamed those parts anymore. Whispers among the locals spoke of vengeance, of a man who had become one with the shadows, guiding spectral beasts from beyond. Thorne, who had fled back to town, added his own notes in a final, hidden correspondence. He speculated that Elias hadn't escaped alone, that perhaps he had allies in the quarters, people who had learned from his quiet example. Or worse, that the bond he forged lingered, imprinting on the land itself. The heartbreak deepened as the estate unraveled. Families were torn apart in the chaos. Children, wide-eyed and silent, watched as parents were sold off to cover debts, their cries muffled in the night. Victor's letters reveal a man begging for loans, promising the plantation would recover. But the words ring hollow. He sold off land piece by piece, the swamps reclaiming what was left. Lydia's last days were the most pitiable. She refused food, convinced it was tainted with the same scraps Elias had shared with the Boars. In her delirium, she confessed fragments of regret, not for the suffering she caused, but for the control she lost. She died in winter, her body light as a bird's, leaving Victor alone in the echoing halls. He followed not long after, found slumped in his study with a pistol in hand, the official report calling it suicide. But the servants who discovered him spoke of strange marks on the floor, like hoofprints in the dust. Thorne's journal ends abruptly, his final entry a warning scribbled in haste. He wrote of returning to the plantation one last time, drawn by an unsetting pull. In the ruins of the pen, he found bones scattered, not just boar, but human fragments mingled in. He couldn't explain it, only that the air felt thick, watchful. He left Harrow Parish soon after, never to return, his report sealed away as a curiosity. The inquest wrapped up with no clear answers, blaming the tragedies on fever, accidents, the harsh Bayou life. Elias was listed as fugitive, presumed dead in the swamps. But no body was ever found. The files closed, the story faded into local lore, a cautionary tale told around fires about the man who tamed the untamable. Yet the terror didn't end with the Hargroves. It simmered, waiting. Parish archives hold scattered reports from the years that followed, escapes that succeeded where others failed. Overseers plagued by nightmares of charging shadows. By the Civil War, the plantation was in ruins, its pillars cracked and overgrown, but the land remembered. Freed people who settled nearby spoke of odd occurrences, animals behaving strangely, refusing to cross certain paths. Dogs would whine and back away from the old pen site, their hackles raised at nothing visible. These stories persisted, passed down through generations, blending with the bayou's other mysteries. And here's where it gets truly unsettling, because this isn't just history buried in dusty files. Even now, in 2025, echoes linger in Louisiana's haunted landscapes. Take the Myrtles Plantation, not far from where Harrow once stood. It's famed as one of America's most haunted spots, with legends of restless spirits and unexplained events. Visitors report hearing grunts in the night, shadows moving like beasts through the fog. Shows like Unsolved Mysteries and Ghost Hunters have documented it, capturing EVPs that sound like low rumbles, whispers of names long forgotten. Just this year, in October, A TikTok video went viral from a tour group at Myrtles, claiming a figure appeared in the mist, surrounded by what looked like spectral animals. And in January, a blog post detailed a historian's encounter with unexplained scratches, deep and curved, on her arm after exploring the grounds. Coincidence? Or something more? Modern investigations hint at patterns. Paranormal researchers using thermal cameras have picked up anomalies in the bayous, heat signatures that move in packs, vanishing before they can be tracked. Locals in St. Francisville share Reddit threads about pets acting up near old plantation sites, refusing food or staring into empty spaces. One post from last spring described a dog that suddenly turned protective, snarling at its owner as if seeing a threat from the past. These aren't isolated. Connect to a thread of unsolved mysteries across the South, where the scars of slavery manifest in ways science can't fully explain. Is it psychological residue, the land holding on to trauma? Or did Elias unlock something deeper, a force that defies time? We can't know for sure. The files offer clues, but no closure. Elias's fate remains a void, a question mark in the archives. Did he perish in the swamps, his body claimed by the very wilderness he navigated? Or did he survive, slipping north to freedom, carrying secrets that inspired others? The heartbreaking truth is in the suffering he endured. A man isolated, forging bonds out of desperation, only to see them destroyed. The terror lies in the implication that power built on cruelty is always fragile, ready to turn. What if the beasts we create, human or otherwise, remember their keepers? What if the oppressed find allies in the unexpected, shifting the balance forever? This story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. In a world still grappling with legacies of injustice, are we truly free of these shadows? Look at the inequalities today, the systems that echo the past. Do they breed their own quiet rebellions, waiting to emerge? The Harrow betrayal isn't over. It lives in the unanswered questions, the chills that run down your spine on a quiet night. Perhaps Elias is still out there, in legend or in spirit, reminding us that loyalty isn't owned, it's earned. If this tale has left you pondering the dark corners of history, hit that like button to show your support. Drop a comment below. What do you think happened to Elias? And don't forget to subscribe for more dives into the mysteries that time tried to bury. We'll see you in the next shadow.